Hello everyone, my name is Hollingsworth and I will be creating a cool tutorial for you guys today using this DMM plugin for Maya 2012. Uh, Thanks a lot for joining me today. So let's get started. I have a piece of geometry here that I imported from another scene. It's basically a sidewalk that I modeled. And let's go ahead and put this on a separate layer. So this is an effect that we see a lot in movies. We see this in video game trailers and commercials, and it's a popular effect where the ground collapses on itself. You could actually use this effect for an earthquake. If you have a character that lands on the ground and the ground shatters, or if you just wanted to simulate an effect where it was being animated a long time, where it actually was collapsing on itself. And that's the actual effect that I'm going for. So we're going to create a ground shattering effect that takes place over time. So I'm just simply scaling this out. I'm making sure that this ground geometry fits in with my sidewalk pretty accurately. And that seems like it's pretty close. I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to scale it in Y just a bit. And I'm going to bring it out in Z a little bit more to kind of get it to the edge here. And that's perfect. Good. In my side view, I'll go into wireframe and I'm just going to translate my ground up so that it matches perfectly. And I'll call this ground. Great. So in future tutorials that I present for you guys, I'm going to go over how to fracture your pieces of geometry utilizing splinters, utilizing auto cages. But for this example, I'm going to show you guys how to use the bare DMM object technique. It's pretty cool. It's pretty easy, and it gives you tons of control. So I'm going to turn off my sidewalk, and how this essentially works is you create a DMM object as a TED cage, but it doesn't have a surface mesh. So it's a little bit different. It's not being generated utilizing the auto cage. We're kind of manufacturing our own auto cage or TED cage, if you will, for our original piece of geometry. So I'm going to start by centering my pivot, freezing transformations, uh, deleting my history, and make sure you clean out your objects before you turn it into a DMM asset. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to explain to you why I'm duplicating this, because similar to creating an auto TED cage with this feature here, um, I'm just making one manually, which is nice. So I'm just scaling it up, making sure that my object is inside, and it is. It lines up perfectly. Great. So with this being selected now, under your DMM asset menu, let's create a bare DMM object, and let's use the from polymesh technique. Take a look at your help menu and see what each one of these do. Look at the advantages and the disadvantages of utilizing these guys. But for this lesson here, the from polymesh works great. So you can see now our resolution we have. That's going to be now translated over to our original object. And to do that, let's open up our outliner with our ground 1 selected, which is our bare object. let's select our ground, and under your DMM asset again, we can add surface mesh to bare DMM object, or we can just utilize the icon here, which will do the same thing for us. Get into the habit of using your icons. It's going to help speed up your workflow, and it's just a lot easier than going in here and then looking for what option you want when you already know which one of these icons will achieve that result. So now if I wanted to further change my resolution and my topology, I'll open up my DMM Asset Manager, select my ground, and here the scaling feature under your text generation parameters. In order for you to change your topology, if you wanted to create wood or a specific material where your geometry will break a certain way, you can give this a value of 2 and then change it to your liking, and you'll notice it updates on the fly. But I'm going to leave it at default. I'm not going to bother to change it. And I'm now going to increase my resolution. So by default, your resolution is set to 10,000. Let's bring this down to a value of 1. And the lower you go with your area setting, the more dense your geometry will become. So now I'm going to take it down even further, 0.5, get more resolution, and that's fine for now. I'll continue with the lesson, um, but I just wanted to quickly explain to you guys what those features and what they provide. So let's turn back on my sidewalk, and let's now press play and see what happens. Cool. So our ground begins to fall. Let's give this our timeline 100 frames, and I also have a camera here for you guys that's animated along the Z orientation just a bit, and we may need to adjust that animation, but for right now let's continue to move forward. So with my DMM object selected, I can either go into the DMM Asset Manager menu here, and I can add a new DMM region by selecting a DMM passive region. But once again, I'll introduce the icon to you guys so you guys can get familiar and feel comfortable using the icons that the shelf provides. So I'm going to add a new passive region. I'll go to my top view, I'll scale it up, I'll translate it over in X, scale it in Z, and you can see where I'm going with this. I kind of want to hold the edges in place as my concrete falls in space. I'll bring it over just the edge right here just a bit to kind of leave some shards here that gets left behind. Perfect. And let's look at our dimensions. So we have 2.5, 1, and 22. Let's just round these numbers off, because what I'll do is when I create this next passive region, 3, 1, and 22, I'll just use the same dimensions we have for the one here to the left. Great. So we're moving pretty swiftly right along. Let's create a layer, select our passive regions, assign it, let's template it, and let's call this passive regions. Region, that's fine. So now when I press play, this is what we get, and that's pretty cool. The material that you see here is assigned by your DMM default material. So if I select my material editor, you'll notice the default settings we have here. We want concrete, so let's go in our material library, and we have several types of concretes. We have concrete medium, concrete strong. I'm going to use the concrete medium, and let's press play and see what happens. So now we see our ground shatter with the desired material that I assigned to it, and that's cool. This actually can recursively shatter it into a lot more pieces, but due to its current settings right now, it's prohibiting us from that taking place. So I'm going to tweak these settings a bit to make them a little bit more breakable. But for right now, I'll leave it as is. Now, I just don't want my effect to shatter all at once. I want to animate this. Let's say we have a earthquake, a meteor hitting the ground, and it's causing a fracture along the course of the street. Let's go about animating that. Well, how would you animate that? Do we need texture maps? Do we need to script anything? And not saying that those techniques are not good; those are great. But with DMM, we don't have to utilize those type of techniques. So let's create a another DMM passive region. And if I go into my top view and I cover my entire ground with this region, what happens? Well, nothing. Our ground will stay where it is. If I just have this area, let me just show up a little bit more to make it a little bit more uh, noticeable. And I press play. You notice what happens. Now we have whatever area of our region, of our passive region, is not covering our ground. That geometry will be active, and that's pretty sophisticated. That's pretty intuitive by DMM. It's smart. It knows to keep these faces inactive, but yet these faces active, and that's something where we get a lot of control. I can easily go in and create numerous passive regions and animate them accordingly. But for this lesson, we're going to keep it pretty simple. I'm going to start my animation here, and I don't like to animate actual DMM objects or features, so I'm going to create a locator. And you don't have to do this, but I like to create locators because it just helps me uh, keep my scene organized, and that way I know where things are, and I know what's in what is and what's not being animated. Cool. Excuse me. Cool. So I'm going to bring this up a bit and translate Y. I'm going to key the frame 1 of my Z dimension, and let's select our ground. Let's open up the asset manager, and let's disable it for right now. Let's select our locator, go to frame 90, and let's just animate it right to this position we see here. And let's set another key. So now when we press play, we see our locator being animated, and that's perfect. I'm going to open up my graph editor. So under animation editors, graph editor, and let's straighten this tangent out and do the same for that. So that way we have a linear line. We don't have our locator gaining speed during the course of our frames. It's moving at the same speed throughout. Perfect. So now what I will do is, with my locator selected, I will shift select my passive region here, and I'm going to constrain parent. Cool. And that is exactly what I want. Let's create another layer for this guy. Let's call this animated passive. Cool. And we now have that on a separate layer. So I'm going to hide that. And nothing happens. So we need to turn on our DMM object once again. We had it disabled. And let's see if that works. Cool. So now we begin to see our geometry be affected by gravity as our passive region travels through space. So I'm kind of happy with this, but I kind of don't like the way it's shattering. I want to get a lot more detail, and I want to have an illusion of it having a little bit of flexibility, but it's still pretty rigid. So I'm going to go in my material editor. I'm going to tweak my toughness a bit. I'm going to bring my toughness down to a low value so that it can kind of bend just a bit. My density I'll take down to 2000 as well. I'll keep these values the same, and I'm going to increase my stiffness. And if I press play, now we get a little bit more braking, but you can see the difference in behavior. I don't like the way my shards are looking, so I'm going to randomize that a bit and add a lot more detail. So I'll bring up my DMM Asset Manager again, and let's take our resolution down to 0.1. Our progress bar pops up, and great. Now look at all this wonderful detail that we have. Now when I press play, we're gonna get a lot more uh, definition and random areas that have a nice pattern to it, and it's not so unison with how it's breaking over the course of our 100 frames. So that's pretty cool. I think I'm gonna tweak my materials just a bit more. I'm gonna increase my toughness back to 2500, and I'm gonna take my stiffness down just a bit more, and that's pretty good. So I'm gonna save this scene, and I'll do a quick playlist for you guys. I'm going to look through my camera that I have animated, turn on my wireframe, and I will do a play blast, and I'll be right back. So I have a play blast for you guys, and while I pause the video, instead of doing a play blast and then caching and then doing another play blast, I just cached before I did the play blast. So there are some things I see here that I like, but there are some things that I definitely would like to tweak. So let's go ahead and make those tweaks. So as you can see, my simulation's cached. I can move through my timeline without having any problems. What I would like to do is, I don't like the way we're having this much of our geometry shown. So I'm going to take my passive regions here, and I'm just going to translate them over just a bit more. And I'll go to frame 1, and I'll do the same just a little bit more. And I'll bring this one back just a tad bit. I also, when I go to the last frame, I kind of want to have another passive region here. I don't want these shards here to break. So instead of adjusting this here, I'm just going to create another passive region. So I'll hide this, select my geometry, create another passive region, bring that over here just a bit, and let's just scale it. And I think that's going to be fine, because all I want is to have some debris, some shards hanging off this ledge here. I don't want to have a void where now all you just see is my sidewalk. I kind of want to have some shattered pieces sticking out, and that's how we'll be able to achieve that. I'll just assign this to the passive regions again, and turn the visibility off. Cool. So now, with this being selected, I'm going to change a few things as well because uh, based off of what we see here, I kind of think I want bigger chunks. So in order to achieve that, all I would need to do is in my material editor, increase my toughness. So I'm going to do that. Um, I'm also going to increase my stiffness a tad bit more. And I think we should be fine. So I'm going to make sure that my cache is turned off. And one thing about DMM you'll notice when you start caching your objects, all you need to do is make sure this is selected and just have a path where you want your cache file to be stored. So I'm going to, in order for you to see the adjustments that you've made to any materials or any settings, we have to turn this off. I normally go a few frames in just to see what my new simulation is doing. And let's get a little bit closer. And I kind of like the way that now our shards are breaking, but they're not breaking with such small pieces. Before they were, these guys were breaking, these guys were breaking. Now we're having a nice spread out fracturing pattern over the course of our 100 frames. So that's perfect. I'm happy with that. I'm also going to turn off this wireframe shaded mode so we can see how our pattern takes place. And that's really neat. So don't get confused, guys. We see our mesh and we see all these triangles and we kind of think our geometry is going to have the same exact shape, but it really doesn't. You get a lot of nice variety depending on how you tweak your material attributes. So I'm going to create a quick light, create a light, point light. I'm going to hit 7 on my keyboard. And let's give this a value of 1.5. I'm just going to snap it to my locator. And in my outliner, I'm going to select my locator, shift select my point light, and I'm going to constrain parent. I'm going to turn off my lights so they're not visible, but yet we still get our objects to be illuminated. So now when we turn off our wireframe and press play, we get some nice interactive lighting for our fractured geometry there. And that looks pretty cool. What I'll do also is I'll create another light, spotlight. I'll look through the selected camera, show my light so I can kind of see my penumbra angle. And I'm just going to give this a value of 0.3 and give this a nice blue fall off. Something like that's fine. Let's see what 0.5 does. Give it a little bit of a drop off. And let's increase our penumbra angle and our cone angle as well. So now when we look through our render cam, we get a nice fill light at the bottom here, which looks really cool. Great, so we're almost done. Lastly, what I'll do is for kicks, and this will take not too much of our time, but I'm going to create a particle system for you guys, and just to create some debris as it's kind of just shooting out as these shards begin to fall. So I'm going to pause the video for you guys, have that set up. Well, what I'll do is when I get back, I'll go over it with you. It'll only take a couple seconds, but it's just an extra fun tip if you wanted to go about adding some type of debris or particle instancing with your shadow geometry. So I'm going to cache this one more time, and I'll be right back. Here we have a play blast of our cached ground shattering, and with those minor tweaks, this is perfect. We have a little bit more room out here. Our chunks are a bit bigger. We see we have geometry here that's kind of hanging over the edge, because before these areas here were falling down. By us adding that extra density region, we can neutralize and control that area, which is great. So that's looking really cool. I'm happy with that. I'm going to turn on my shaded default view. I'm going to turn on wireframe real quick. And because this is cached, let's go in and just quickly create some debris for our bridge. I'm sorry, for our ground shattering. Now, if we wanted to take this effect to the next level, we could actually create an ocean down here, a CG ocean. If this was an actual bridge, if this was just a road, we can create another piece of geometry below this, so our shards can collide. But for this lesson, I think this is going to be just fine. So under the dynamics menu, let's create a emitter. In the channel box editor, let's make this a volume. And I'm going to turn on my animated passive density region, just because I want to be able to accurately scale out my emitter to the portion that's going to be visible. Perfect. So I'm kind of happy with that. I'm just going to scale in this a bit more, and we're good to go. So quickly, I'm going to tweak my settings a bit. I'm going to make these away from center and away from axis 0.5, along axis 1.5. I'm going to select my particle system, and let's take our radius down to 0.1. Let's take our shading, and let's create spheres instead of clouds. And under our emitter, let's give this a good amount. So 1500 should be fine. So when we press play, that's what we get. So in order for our particles to fall under the dynamics property tab, let's deactivate this ignore solver gravity option box, and this is going to enable our particles to obey our gravity. And also, let's take our particle size down a lot smaller. So let's say 0.025, and I'm going to randomize them a bit. Let's say randomize ID. I have a couple that are tiny, a couple that are big, and that's pretty cool. So if I look at my camera, I'm kind of happy with those size particles. Let's look at our shading tab once again, and under the color section, let's just deactivate the blue swatch. So all we have is just the white swatch there for us. I'm going to turn off my wireframe once again, turn on my interactive lighting, hide my density region, hide my lights, and we're almost done actually. But before I conclude, I see my particles are going to emit forever, so I'm going to have to take my emitter, and at frame 90 or 65, where I think my particle emission should stop, we're going to key that emitter to be off. So quickly, let's select our particles, let's deactivate them, and let's try to roughly guess where our debris would stop emitting. I probably would say 65. So let's say we take this here, we key our rate at 0 at 65, and at frame 60, let's put it back to 1500. And for the last step, let's select our locator, let's select our emitter, and let's constrain parent. So now we should be all set to go. I'm gonna hide my dynamics so we won't see our emitter, and I'm gonna turn on my interactive lighting again, and I'm gonna do a quick play blast for you guys. And I'll escape that real quick so that way we can actually see our. And it's a good thing I escaped it because I totally did not remember to activate my particles. So if I quickly press play, there we go. Our particles are shooting up a little bit, and then they start to fall down. Perfect. I'm happy with that. So let's go back into our render cam, and let's now do a simple enough play blast. I kind of want a little more particles, so let's make that uh, window animation editor graph editor. And if I select my emitter, let's straighten our tangents out, and let's give that a value of 2000. And I think that's going to be more than enough. And I think there are some bits that may be a tad bit too big. So I'm just going to bring those guys down just a bit more. And that's pretty good. So without further ado, let's do a quick play blast and see our final effect. So we see our small bits of debris shooting up. And what's nice about this particle system, it's customizable. We could instance pieces of shards or concrete. We can take it a step further and actually put a street texture on this, or concrete texture if we like. In future tutorials, I'll show you guys how to apply textures to your geometry. But for this lesson, I wanted to emphasize utilizing different techniques and how we could go about animating fracture systems to our DMM objects. So I'm pretty happy with this, and it's looking pretty cool. So this is cached. It's pretty fast, and that's what's another cool feature about DMM is the cache. It's a really cool caching system. It's unlike any other that I've played with from the past, and it's pretty solid and accurate. So I'm just gonna pause this and escape out, and let's take a look at our new play blast. See what that looks like with our particles. And there we go. We can see our particles there. They're hard to see, but they're there. And I did a render. I'll pause this and show you a render that I did with the same technique, but our particle count is a lot much more, and our particle size is pretty noticeable. So that's the extra tip on how to add smalling particles from your demolition. And I hope I was able to help you guys out today. So once again, thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Take care, guys.